But first, as the end of the year draws to a close, it's usually the time to take stock of where we are in our lives, what we're doing and where we want to be this time next year. We look around at our local community, at our families, at ourselves and at our wider world, and we make assessments. And sometimes, no matter how optimistic you want to be, it's hard not to feel we come up short in lots of ways. Indeed, sometimes you can be forgiven for having the sense that the world's gone slightly crazy. This morning, as I was reading the newspapers online, cup of tea in hand, I scanned the main news stories. As you'd expect, there was still heavy coverage of the volcano disaster in New Zealand. But when it comes to the news items generated by human activity, these were those headlines. The real prospect of an out-and-out Marxist being elected Prime Minister in Britain. Online pedophiles set to exploit encrypted apps to make detection impossible, backed in by the big online players who don't seem to want to help to expose them. Greta Thunberg named Time magazine's Person of the Year. A New South Wales Coalition Cabinet Minister blaming bushfires on climate change, not a Green, a Conservative. Indigenous footballers wanting to ban the national anthem at an annual All-Stars match, and the electricity market regulator supposedly claiming that even more intermittent power simply ruled out the need for any more baseload coal-fired power stations to ever be built again in this country. So what have we got here? The gullibility of voters who might fall for a politician posing as Santa Claus in Britain? Technology that facilitates human depravity? The cult of celebrity? The readiness of politicians who should know better to pander to the zeitgeist? The seemingly increasing resentment of people who identify as Indigenous? And the sheer folly of thinking that as yet unknown or uneconomic technology can give us reliable power when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. That's what we got today. And I fear that's all getting worse. Across the Western world, parties of the left are becoming more addicted to tax and spend, more consumed by identity politics and more enthralled to the climate cult. And parties of the centre-right, while often good at winning elections on the back of the left, making themselves big targets, they don't seem nearly so good at combating this insidious cultural drift by winning over hearts and minds. The so-called quiet Australians might have returned the Morrison government because they feared Bill Shorten's retiree tax and because they didn't think Labor had reconciled its emissions obsession with preserving jobs. But we don't seem much closer to getting a power system focused on delivering affordable and reliable electricity or extra water storages that might help improve and drought-proof our country. Our schools, well, they're continuing to fall down the global academic performance ladder while filling our kids with the gospel of climate change and white guilt. So where are the leaders prepared to counter all of this with robust common sense? Well, mostly they're calculating that they don't want to be in arguments they can't win because they're not scientists and can't appear to contradict the so-called settled science of man-made climate change. And they're not members of any minority group, so they have, they say, no moral standing to question gender fluidity, all the rest of the guilt-exploiting cultural Marxism that's playing havoc with our thinking. The problem here, as a former PM said recently, it's that a majority that stays silent soon becomes a minority. The only way that our society won't continue to drift in a direction that you and I don't like and that the majority of Australians reject is if more and more of us speak our minds in our families, in our workplaces and around the dinner table, and if we're on it, on social media too. The people who think that our world will soon end because we're wrecking the planet and who think that Western society is fundamentally flawed, I tell you, they aren't shy in speaking up. So why should those of us who think that reducing emissions here doesn't seem to make much sense when China and India are massively increasing theirs, and who think that for all its imperfections, Western civilization has produced the freest, the fairest and the most prosperous societies the world has ever known, Why should we be so polite, too polite, that we don't speak our minds? Or are we just too timid to risk an argument? In 2 or 3 weeks' time, rather than just New Year's resolutions to get fit or walk the dog more, how about we all resolve to speak up and speak out and deny the left the uncontested platform that they've had to date? Otherwise, by letting them win, the rest of us all lose.